Have you ever judged someone just by looking at them, without realizing you were standing in the presence of a genius? What if the person sweeping the floor knew more than the person holding the microphone? Today, you're about to witness a story that turns every assumption upside down. A woman the world ignored, a moment no one saw coming, and a quiet mind that changed everything. Stay with me, because sometimes the greatest revolutions don't begin with loud voices. They begin with quiet hands and a piece of chalk. Emma Carter walked quietly into the lecture hall, a simple woman wrapped in a worn gray cardigan. Her steps were light, almost hesitant, as if she could somehow make herself invisible by sheer will. The large room buzzed with energy, filled with sharp-eyed graduate students, tenured professors, and ambitious postdocs. Everyone was here to witness the famed Professor Charles Whitmore's symposium. A towering figure in theoretical mathematics, known as much for his brilliance as for his sharp tongue and intolerance toward perceived mediocrity. Emma chose a seat in the farthest back row, smoothing her cardigan over her plain white blouse. At 38, she was noticeably older than the students around her. She clutched a spiral notebook in her hands, the same one she scribbled in during long night shifts working maintenance around campus. No one paid her much attention at first. She liked it better that way. The lecture hall settled as Professor Whitmore strode to the podium. His presence commanded immediate silence. His silver hair was immaculately combed, his navy suit tailored to perfection. He cleared his throat, surveying the room with a critical gaze. His eyes briefly landed on Emma. His mouth twitched, a small, almost imperceptible smirk of dismissal. Emma knew that look. She had seen it when she first applied to the university's custodial staff years ago. A quick judgment. A door silently slammed. "Today," Whitmore announced, "we will explore Riemann's hypothesis and its relevance to quantum encryption." His voice filled the room, steady and authoritative. Heads nodded eagerly. Emma opened her notebook and began writing, absorbing every word. As the symposium unfolded, doctoral candidates presented their research. Complex theories and abstract models danced across the projectors. Emma's pen never stopped moving. She understood more than she let on. Mathematics wasn't just a subject to her. It was a language she had taught herself late at night while raising a daughter alone, a secret world where the chaos of life finally made sense. During the first break, two students in crisp polo shirts passed by Emma's row, whispering too loudly to be truly private. "Who's the cleaning lady taking notes?" one chuckled. "Probably just sitting in for continuing ed credits," the other replied, not bothering to lower his voice. Whitmore hates when non-math people crash these things. Emma felt the words land like small stones. She kept her head down, pretending not to hear. Her hands tightened around her notebook. They didn't know her story. They didn't know that numbers had saved her, had given her a way to survive when everything else had fallen apart. She looked around the room. Not a single face turned toward her with kindness. No one offered a seat closer to the front. No one asked if she understood the material. To them, she was furniture, an interloper. When the session resumed, Professor Whitmore presented a new topic, an unsolved problem that had stumped even the brightest minds. He detailed his own proposed approach with fluid precision, his chalk scrawling dense equations across the massive blackboard. His method was elegant, but to Emma's practiced eye, a subtle inconsistency emerged, a tiny crack in an otherwise brilliant facade. At the end of his explanation, Whitmore turned to the audience. "Any questions?" he asked, in a tone that suggested only foolishness would compel someone to answer. The room remained still. Students glanced at each other nervously but said nothing. Emma's heart pounded. Her hand twitched upward, almost involuntarily, as if drawn by something stronger than fear. She immediately regretted it. Every head in the lecture hall turned toward her. Professor Whitmore's eyebrows rose in visible mock surprise. "Yes, ma'am," he said, each word laced with a slow, deliberate condescension. Emma's voice was small but steady. "I was wondering, in step 4, doesn't the variable transformation create inconsistencies when applied to the boundary conditions?" The room froze. A few students exchanged wide-eyed glances, others smirked. Whitmore's expression hardened. "And your name?" he demanded. "Emma Carter," she said quietly. "And your department?" His voice was sharp, a dagger wrapped in velvet. I work in facilities management." Emma admitted, her cheeks flushing under the fluorescent lights. The audience erupted in a low murmur. Facilities management, the cleaning lady, the nerve. Professor Whitmore let the silence drag on just a little too long, savoring it. Fascinating, he finally said, the word dripping disdain. And you believe you have identified a flaw in my work? Emma opened her mouth, but the words died on her lips. Laughter rippled through the hall. Polite, controlled, but cruel nonetheless. She sat frozen, the walls of the lecture hall closing in on her. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to raise her hand. Whitmore's condescension cut deeper with each second. Instead of engaging, he dismissed her. Instead of answering, he humiliated her. Emma Carter sank lower into her seat, gripping her notebook like a life raft, wishing the ground would swallow her whole. She didn't know yet, none of them did, that this quiet, invisible woman was about to shatter everything they thought they knew. Professor Whitmore adjusted his cufflinks slowly, theatrically, letting the tension in the room thicken. Since our guest from facilities management has such keen insights, he said, his voice carrying a sharp edge, perhaps she would honor us by demonstrating her mathematical expertise. Laughter flickered again through the rows of students, sharper now, meaner. Emma's heart raced. She wanted to sink into the floor, to become invisible. She thought about shaking her head, declining the invitation. But something deeper held her in place. A slow, simmering exhaustion. Years of being overlooked, underestimated, laughed at behind closed doors. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was anger, maybe it was simply that she had nothing left to lose. Whitmore extended a piece of chalk toward her like a sword being handed to an unworthy knight. "Come forward, Miss Carter," he said, almost smiling. The walk from the back row to the chalkboard stretched into an eternity. Each step seemed to echo louder than the last. Emma felt the stares burning into her back, felt the collective expectation of her failure. Someone in the front row whispered, "This is gonna be painful." At the podium, Whitmore sketched an equation onto the board, a complicated differential equation from advanced multivariate calculus. Not impossible, but designed to be humiliatingly difficult for anyone not trained at the doctoral level. He stepped aside, crossing his arms with satisfaction. "Take your time," he said, voice thick with mock encouragement. "We're all eager to learn from diverse perspectives." More laughter. Emma took the chalk with a hand that trembled slightly. She stared at the dense jungle of symbols before her. Behind her, she could almost feel the sneers, the condescension, the smirks of the students who believed the world had already sorted itself properly into the capable and the incapable, and that she clearly belonged to the latter. Among the sea of judgmental faces, only one did not seem to mock her. A woman in the front row, Dr. Angela Reyes, a visiting professor from MIT, watched Emma not with disdain, but with quiet curiosity. Emma closed her eyes for half a second. She pictured the equations the way she always had, not as rigid rules but as a living, breathing language of patterns. The symbols on the board rearranged themselves in her mind, forming shapes she could understand. When she opened her eyes, the fear was still there, but now something stronger accompanied it: clarity. She raised the chalk and made her first mark, methodically, carefully. Whitmore's mouth twitched, already preparing a cutting remark. But he didn't speak. The lecture hall grew unusually still. The scratching sound of chalk against the board became the only sound. Emma worked through the first few steps. She paused, checked her work, moved forward. The nerves hadn't vanished, but her training, the private, grueling discipline she had forged alone at kitchen tables and public libraries, carried her through. Behind her, Whitmore's arms slowly uncrossed. In the audience, whispers began to ripple again, but this time they were different. Less mocking, more puzzled. "She's doing it," someone said, incredulous. Emma finished the final step and placed the chalk gently down on the tray. She turned around, face flushed but composed. Professor Whitmore approached the board, frowning. His sharp eyes scanned her solution, searching for an obvious mistake he could pounce upon. But the mistake didn't come. The calculation was not only correct, it was elegantly executed, each line flowing logically into the next. After an unbearable pause, Whitmore spoke, his voice tight. "That is correct," he said stiffly. "Though, of course, it is a standard problem. Any student with basic calculus knowledge should manage." He turned away quickly, unwilling to dwell on the acknowledgement. In the front row, Dr. Reyes exchanged a knowing glance with a colleague. She said nothing yet, but her fingers tapped her notebook thoughtfully, as if filing away a discovery she intended to explore later. Whitmore erased the board with short, furious strokes. "Let's try something more challenging," he said. His voice now carried a sharpness it had lacked before, a sign that the dynamic in the room was shifting, even if he refused to acknowledge it. He turned back to the board and began writing a second problem, far more difficult, far less standard. An equation pulled not from textbooks, but from his own current theoretical research, a wicked problem, a trap disguised as an opportunity. Whitmore capped the marker with a flourish and stepped back, arms once again folded. "This problem," he said, addressing the room though his eyes stayed locked on Emma, "has implications for quantum computing encryption." He turned slightly, almost inviting the audience into the performance. "Of course, if Miss Carter would prefer to return to her seat, we would certainly understand." The challenge hung heavy in the air. Emma looked at the board, her mind racing. This was different. The notations were unfamiliar, the complexity overwhelming at first glance. A wave of panic threatened to swallow her. Maybe she had been foolish to raise her hand, maybe she had overreached, maybe she was exactly what they thought she was, a woman out of her depth. The room was deathly silent, every eye trained on her, waiting for her to fail, waiting for her to confirm what they already believed about people like her. Emma Carter stood frozen between two fates: to sit down quietly and disappear, or to stay and fight, knowing full well the odds were against her. Emma Carter tightened her grip on the chalk. The board loomed before her, the complex equation twisting and snarling like a living thing. She heard the slight shuffle of feet, the barely suppressed coughs, the collective breath of a room waiting to see her stumble. Behind her, Professor Whitmore shifted impatiently, already preparing to reclaim the board and the dignity he felt slipping away. Emma inhaled slowly. She thought of Sophie, her daughter, struggling to pay for school. She thought of all the years she had buried her mind under practical worries, bills, shifts, responsibilities, while numbers whispered to her in dreams she was too tired to chase. Her hand moved, almost without permission. At first, she simply reorganized the given information, trying to understand the beast before her. She rewrote the variables, aligning terms, isolating structures. Each stroke of chalk was an act of defiance. From the third row, a student whispered, "Wait, she's not just guessing." The abstract symbols began to untangle in Emma's mind. She remembered an article she'd read months ago at the public library during her lunch break, something about a novel approach to quantum encryption mathematics. It hadn't made complete sense to her at the time, but now pieces began to click into place. Slowly, Emma began to trace a pathway through the chaos. Professor Whitmore hovered near the board, arms still folded, though the confidence in his posture had begun to erode. His mouth set into a hard, thin line. Minutes passed. Emma's initial movements were cautious, exploratory, but with each correct transformation, her confidence grew. The unfamiliar notation no longer seemed alien. It became familiar ground. Students leaned forward in their seats, their expressions shifting. The smirks faded, frowns of confusion replaced them. Dr. Angela Reyes leaned in, watching Emma's progress with growing fascination. She scribbled quick notes, her brows knitting together. At one particularly complex transformation, Emma paused, head tilted. She hesitated, sensing the trap embedded deep within the structure of the problem. Whitmore seized the moment. "A valiant effort," he said, voice carrying an unmistakable note of triumph. "Perhaps now would be a good time to yield the floor," Emma interrupted him, softly but unmistakably. "Wait." The words spoken so simply sliced through the room. Whitmore's mouth snapped shut. Students straightened in their seats. Emma stared at the board, willing her mind to find the thread hidden among the tangled equations. And then she saw it. A faint glimmer of order inside the mess. A transformation, unconventional, unexpected, that could collapse the complexity into something manageable. It was a risk. If she was wrong, she would humiliate herself even further. If she was right, her hand moved again, this time faster, more assured. The room fell into an even deeper silence. The scratching of the chalk became rhythmic, almost hypnotic. Line by line, she restructured the equation. What had seemed like an impenetrable wall of symbols began to crack open, revealing hidden patterns underneath. In the front row, Dr. Reyes leaned forward so intently she nearly rose from her seat. A soft gasp escaped from a student as Emma executed a bold simplification, one that none of them, not even the professors, had anticipated. Professor Whitmore stepped closer to the board, frowning hard. He looked at Emma's work, then back at the problem he had written. His face tightened. His hands, once casually folded, now twitched slightly at his sides. He saw what she was doing, and he didn't know how to stop it. Emma's final transformation connected, sealing the solution with breathtaking elegance. She stepped back from the board. The chalk trembled slightly between her fingers. She set it down carefully. A beat of silence. 2 beats. 3. Professor Whitmore stood staring at the solution. His chest rose and fell sharply once. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. In the front row, Dr. Reyes whispered, almost reverently, "She's not just solving it, she's improving it." The room felt suspended between 2 realities. The one they had known when Emma first raised her hand, and the one she had just forced them to confront. Emma Carter, the woman in the gray cardigan, the cleaner, the invisible worker, had just cracked open a door they thought was closed to people like her, and nothing, not status, not titles, not sneers, could erase what they had all just witnessed. Professor Whitmore's face was a portrait of disbelief. He stepped closer to the board, tracing Emma's transformations with a finger. Each mark she had made was precise, logical, elegant. It wasn't supposed to be possible. Not from someone like her. Not from a woman who, by all outward signs, didn't belong in his world. Behind him, the audience sat in stunned silence. The same students who had chuckled earlier now watched with wide, uncertain eyes. The professors in the front rows leaned in, whispering to each other in urgent, hushed tones. Whitmore cleared his throat. "While unconventional," he said, the words sharp-edged and heavy, "the approach appears mathematically sound." But even as he spoke, his authority was crumbling. The room felt different now, charged, electric. Something irreversible had happened, and everyone could feel it. Emma stood quietly by the board, saying nothing. She didn't need to. Her work spoke for her. Dr. Angela Reyes stood up. She didn't ask for permission. She crossed the room to the blackboard, inspecting Emma's solution with a critical eye. Her frown deepened, not in disapproval, but in concentration. She turned slowly, facing the lecture hall. "This," she said, her voice clear and unwavering, "is not just correct, it's brilliant." A ripple passed through the room. Some students exchanged glances, others shifted in their seats, unsure how to respond. Professor Whitmore opened his mouth to retort, but Dr. Reyes cut him off, pointing to a specific part of Emma's work. "This transformation," she said, tapping the board, "this isn't something taught in any standard curriculum. It aligns with the Lu Takahashi method, a technique only published last month in the International Journal of Quantum Mathematics." She turned back to Emma, studying her intently. "Where did you learn this?" Emma hesitated. She felt the weight of a lifetime pressing down on her, years of hiding, shrinking, surviving. "I didn't learn it," she said finally, her voice steady. "I just saw it." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then a student from the middle rose. A boy who had earlier smirked at her raised his hand, his face flushed. "Are you saying you figured this out without formal training?" Emma nodded, feeling exposed but no longer ashamed. Professor Whitmore's posture stiffened. "Impossible," he muttered under his breath. But the conviction was gone from his voice. Dr. Reyes took a step closer to Emma. "Have you documented your work?" she asked urgently. "Other solutions? Other approaches?" Emma hesitated again. "I have notebooks," she said. "Just things I work on, at night, when I can't sleep." At the edges of the room, several professors had begun murmuring to one another. A few had pulled out their phones, discreetly photographing Emma's solution on the board. Professor Whitmore's face turned an alarming shade of gray. He was losing the room. He knew it. Everyone knew it. Dr. Reyes smiled, a small, fierce smile. "You must let us see your notebooks," she said. "This kind of insight, it's rare, exceptionally rare." Emma blinked, struggling to process what was happening. She had walked into the lecture hall invisible. Now the brightest minds in the room were hanging on her every word. The shift was not loud, not explosive. It was deeper, more permanent, an unspoken acknowledgement that could not be undone. Emma Carter, The woman nobody had thought to notice had become undeniable. The walls of pride and hierarchy that had kept her out for so long were beginning to crack, one silent fracture at a time. And for the first time in a long, long while, she allowed herself to hope. The applause started slowly, a few uncertain claps from scattered students. Then it grew, stronger, louder, until the entire lecture hall was standing, a wave of sound rising around Emma Carter like a tide she had never expected to touch her. She stood motionless by the blackboard, chalk dust still clinging to her fingertips, her mind struggling to catch up with the moment. For years, Emma had learned to shrink herself, to take pride only in private victories no one else ever saw. Now, for the first time, her mind, her truest, most hidden self, was no longer invisible. Dr. Angela Rice stepped forward, shielding Emma almost protectively from the gathering crowd. "You are extraordinary," she said, her voice low but fierce. "There are people who spend their whole lives chasing the kind of intuition you just demonstrated." Emma shook her head slightly, disbelieving. "I just see the patterns," she whispered. "I always have. I just never thought it would matter." "It matters," Dr. Ray said. "It matters more than you know." Across the room, Professor Whitmore stood rigid, his face carved into a mask of professional courtesy, barely disguising deeper emotions. Anger, disbelief, perhaps even a grudging respect he could not yet bring himself to voice. The department dean had appeared by his side, murmuring in his ear, occasionally glancing toward Emma with a calculating look. The tide had turned, and even the guardians of the old order could not deny it. Later that afternoon, in a smaller conference room lined with polished oak tables, Emma found herself seated across from some of the most prestigious mathematicians in the country. Not as a cleaner, not as a curiosity, but as a peer. They spoke of fellowship opportunities, of fast-tracked programs, of research grants, of possibilities Emma had never dared allow herself to imagine. "I have notebooks," she said again, her voice small in the cavernous room. "Years of them, just things I was curious about." The dean leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "We would very much like to see them." Emma thought about the spiral-bound journals stacked in cardboard boxes under her bed, worn, filled with cramped handwriting, pages smudged from tired hands and cheap pens. They had been her refuge, her escape from a world that had offered little room for her mind to stretch. Now, suddenly, they were a treasure trove. Dr. Reyes smiled. "And not just see them," she added. "We want to help you develop them, expand them, share them." Emma nodded slowly, the magnitude of it beginning to settle into her bones. That night, walking home under the soft orange glow of the streetlights, Emma called her daughter. Sophie picked up on the third ring, breathless from work. "Mom," she said, "everything okay?" Emma paused, a lump forming in her throat. "Everything's better than okay," she said, her voice cracking. She told Sophie everything, the symposium, the board, the applause, the offers. By the end, Sophie was laughing and crying at the same time. "You're amazing," Sophie said. "I always knew it. I'm so proud of you." Emma smiled through tears. "I did it for me," she said. "But I also did it for you. So you'd never have to wonder if you belonged anywhere you chose to stand." In the weeks that followed, the story of the janitor who outmathed the professors spread quietly but powerfully across campus. Then beyond. It was never about humiliating the professors. It was about recognizing the brilliance that often goes unseen, unheard, unacknowledged. Emma's notebooks, crude, worn, precious, were digitized, analyzed, and marveled at. She began formal study, not because she needed a credential to prove herself, but because she could finally explore freely, without the chains of self-doubt. MIT called, Harvard called. Think tanks and research institutions sent discreet inquiries. But Emma chose carefully. She wanted a future where she could continue learning without losing the quiet love for numbers that had carried her through her darkest nights. At Texas State University, they offered her a unique position. Researcher, mentor, instructor of an experimental mathematics program for non-traditional students, people like her who had brilliance but lacked the pedigree to unlock the doors. She accepted. 1 year later, Emma Carter stood at the front of a much smaller classroom. The walls were not grand, the chairs were mismatched, but the faces watching her were hungry for knowledge. She pushed up the sleeves of her soft gray cardigan, the same one she had worn that day, and picked up a marker. On the whiteboard she wrote, "Never underestimate where greatness can come from." She turned to the students. "When you look at an equation," she said, "don't just look for the right answer. Look for the hidden beauty. And when you look at people, don't just see what's on the surface. The mind you dismiss might be the one that changes everything." In the back row, a young woman raised her hand, hesitating. Emma smiled warmly. "Go ahead," she encouraged. "The question you're afraid to ask might be the one that unlocks the future." As she listened to the student's question, a profound calm settled over her. Emma Carter, once invisible, had not just found her voice. She had found her place, and through her quiet, relentless love of learning, she had torn down a wall that others would now walk through behind her. Outside the classroom, the evening breeze stirred the trees. Life, real life, was still full of bills, obligations, practicalities. But somewhere deep inside her, Emma knew something had changed forever. No title, no degree, no gatekeeper could take away what she had proven. Her mind was extraordinary. And finally, the world knew it too. If Emma's story touched something inside you, if it reminded you that brilliance often hides in places the world overlooks, then maybe it's time we all look a little deeper. Comment 1 if you believe talent and genius can come from anywhere, not just from polished resumes. Comment 2 if you've ever been underestimated, and you know what it feels like to finally be seen. And if you want to hear more true stories of quiet heroes, unexpected victories, and the extraordinary hidden within the ordinary, subscribe to this channel. There are so many more lives, so many more journeys waiting to be shared. Sometimes the brightest minds aren't sitting at the front of the lecture hall. Sometimes they're cleaning it, dreaming, solving, becoming. And when their time comes, they don't just enter the light, they become it.